quite sure where to begin with all this, but you know, recently I had the occasion to take my parents' old 8mm film and have it transferred to DVD. So we sat down and we looked at some of the footage, and it's quite amazing because the footage must come from the years that we had first moved to Cedar Grove, Karen. So you're 6 years old, 5 years old in this, and I guess I'm 6.5 years older than Karen. I know it's hard to believe.
You're older than me?
So there you are. But it's really apparent when you see these pictures. She's incredibly cute in the white glasses that she had, and but so two things became quickly apparent to me when you see these things. One is that I remember how much older I was than she was then, and that it matters, you know, that kind of the first stage of our lives. You know, 6.5 years is a huge difference. You really are an older brother. It's not like, I mean, some of you have siblings that you're 1 or 2 years apart. 6.5 years is a huge difference. And it's Elijah. The real and the imaginary. So it was quickly, you know, visually very apparent when I saw that. But the other thing that's apparent when you see some of this footage is the close sense of family that we had growing up, and that was just touching to me. There's a couple of scenes where my father was being very playful with Karen to get her to react and get me to react with her. So he's kind of play acting with her a bit through some of this, and part of it is my, I think, 8th grade graduation. It was just very touching scenes about Karen getting up on her tiptoes to kiss her older brother, as everybody else used to say. I just remember the kind of very strong family we had. It was a family growing up, you know, in the mid-50s, so you know, people can imagine we were both, you know, red diaper babies. They were both in the CP. I remember the FBI at the door all the time, so you can know what the parents were going through, what that was like. And what we had was a very strong kind of family unit, and one sees that visually right there in the film. And so I remember these two things: one, that we had that, and then what it meant for me to be much older than Karen. And so, but I would try to think back, well, what did I remember? You know, some of it, of course, a lot like even the stories that we, as it were, sing about, at a certain point become mythologized, so who the hell knows what I really remember? I'm told about, certainly my earliest memories, I would have been told would have been lumpy oatmeal or farina that my father made because my mother had C-sections. Our mother had rheumatic fevers as a young girl, and so she wasn't supposed to have children at all, and so we'd be in the hospital for some time, and then my father, who was enough of a patriarch not to do cooking, he of course, he didn't eat many foods either, but he was left making the farina. But what I do remember is that Karen and I shared a bedroom in East Patterson, which is now called Elmwood Park, I think. But we each had one room in these garden apartments. We shared one room in garden apartments, with windows in the back, and 2 single beds, a dresser in between. And every morning or at night when we would play, I had vivid memories of Karen coming to my bed, and I would lie on my back and put her on my feet and throw her up. She would have been 4 years old, and I could have been, you know, 6 years later, 10 years old, and she would giggle enormously and we just played. It was that relationship that one had as a younger kid to an older brother. So that's, you know, part of what I remember from many of these early years, that there was this enormous difference really between us. And I realized that afterwards, ironically, I didn't really know Karen terribly well, in the ways in which you're, you know, in my case, 11, 12, or 13 years old to know a 4-year-old kid. And indeed, by the time I went to college, 6 or 7 years later, Karen was then the age I had been when I'm talking about her being 10 years old. And I go off and leave school entirely. And the first year I'm at college, our mother has heart surgery, which was incredibly traumatic for me, and I can imagine what it was. I never realized we've never actually talked about that, what that experience must have been like for Karen growing up, because you know, I felt pretty young. It said I was just 16 when I was 17, and she would have been 10 years old. And to have your mother going through that time, and she went through horror for about 2 or 3 years with terrible reactions to pills and other stuff. That was really a very early part of our childhood. So what I knew about Karen was coming home for Christmas or Thanksgiving and learning about things. And you know, what I remember as a kind of intermediary stage was always this kind of relationship in which I wasn't just an older brother. I was caught in this kind of liminal space because our parents died very young. Trying to think how old Karen, you may have been 20, 24. So I would have been 30. Dad died 2 years later. And Karen was living in West Virginia for part of that time, and there was not much money that our parents had, and they were leaving some money, and I was in a relationship at that point where I was also an older brother, but also not just a brother. We had very close relations with our parents as well. And I remember a lot of conversations I had with my dad were really about taking care of Karen. You know, would she need money? Find it. You know, is she okay? You know, I don't know what conversation. I didn't hear the conversations on the other side that she would have had with my mother and father about worrying about me, but I just knew those from my side. And so it's quite strange to grow up now and have a 60-year-old sister. the last 20 years have not been about that at all. We're actually, you know, at a certain point, the truth is, people say, "Oh, are you older? Are you younger?" Not because I look older or younger, because at a certain point, Karen grew up. She always looked like my mother. I look like my father. Now people say we look like one another.
You do.
You know, we share now not just a house together, but you know, family together and friends together and histories together. And enormous, I don't just have love for my sister, I have enormous admiration for Karen. For all the things that she's done. I always had great admiration for the life that she led when she was in West Virginia, the values that she had there, and I have enormous respect for the kinds of things that she's been doing. You know, the not-for-profit world, you've got to bust your butt to make a living and get ahead and do good works. And good works can often end up being pretty paternalistic kind of work that can be fairly compromised. And Karen has really fought hard to never compromise herself on this work and really be at the forefront of the kinds of struggles that matter to her, but I always have great respect and they usually matter to me. And I'm now working for a not-for-profit, and the person I call all the time when I need help with that shit is Karen. You know, she's my lodestone on this, but she's also the person who I admire and who I trust in terms of judgment on these kinds of things. I guess I would just say, just in conclusion, there were about 4 things, I guess, that summarize how I feel about my sister in terms of my feelings about her. One is enormous pride in her accomplishments. In the not-for-profit world, she has risen absolutely to the top in terms of the kinds of respect that she has and deservedly has for the kinds of struggles that she's engaged in, the kinds of insights and values that she's brought to those struggles. And in that respect, it's the second thing, of course, for me, it's total integrity. That if I worry about things, I feel I may not always agree, or I may agree, but I always feel I know it comes from a place that's balanced and has at its heart enormous sense of social justice, struggles for equality and issues of that sort that matter to me, and I can rely on Karen. The third is just wisdom. And she's actually smart. It's not the smarts that comes from reading books, or it comes from being thoughtful, being intelligent, knowing how to listen to people, but it comes from things that we learn, frankly, from our parents and our parents' friends and the values that matter to them and were the heart of our work. And the last piece that always has mattered to me is through thick or thin, one has unconditional love for his sister. She has from me, and I have for her. Happy birthday.
That was nice.
Me too. Okay.